Hello, this is Dr. Dilip. I have guided more than 1,200 youths in interfaith relationships over past 19 years and have summarized my experiences in several books. Today, I bring a very special guest, Raj Irashi, who is an American-born Hindu. Raj is a graduate of Harvard University and worked in finance. Raj married to a Jewish woman, assuming their marriage will be an interfaith marriage of equality of two faiths, Hinduism and Judaism, in their children's lives. However, all that changed when they divorced. Raj, before we begin, do you want to tell us, viewers, the significance of your story for them?
Yes, Dilip, and thank you for having me. I think my story is a good case study of the things that you actually warn people about and how engaging in certain rituals from other religions, even if you're doing it totally innocently, can later work against you. In my situation, we separated when the children were just 4 and 2. It was always my understanding that the children would be raised in both our religions, but we started having differences over that soon after our separation and had to go our separate ways on uh, the religious upbringing of the kids. So my ex raised the children Jewish on her time, her 50% of the time, and I raised them Hindu on my 50% of the time with them. Unfortunately, the other party then scheduled additional Hebrew school for the children, but on one of my days, which I didn't like because it meant I would lose a significant amount of time with my kids. Plus, it would interfere with one of my Hindu activities, a particular meditation practice, and create unequal treatment of our religions. We unfortunately ended up in court where many of the things you have warned about, like agreeing to a bris, the Jewish circumcision ritual, were brought up as arguments against me. Uh, the judge ruled against me, basically depriving my children of time for a Hindu activity while more or less obliging them to spend more time on a Jewish activity. But even worse, this judge also declared me to be in bad faith for even filing my motion and punished me financially by ordering me to pay the other party's legal fees. I found that part really, really outrageous and decided to appeal it and ultimately won. But it's a case study in how interfaith marriages can go wrong, especially when the parties divorce. And I think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned. I think it's also a good case study of the bias that Hindu Americans face in the legal system here, even today, systemic bias, I would call it. My case occurred here in New Jersey, which is actually the state with the highest concentration of Hindu Americans, probably 5% of the state. Um, but I was still found to be in bad faith for defending my right to raise my children Hindu on my time. So I think there's still a lot of ignorance about Hindu practices in the legal system, even today. 99% of the judges, even here in New Jersey, have Judeo-Christian names, so indicating their background. And I think this shows there's, a desperate need for reform in the system, as well as education of judges about Hinduism and Hindu practices.
Wow, that's a very interesting subject matter for Hindu Americans to know. So the issue in any interfaith marriage will get worse when the time comes to decide the religion of children. The dating couple, let's say in their early 20s, will discuss some generality about how the children will be raised, but rarely they have a clear idea what they are getting into it. I say in almost all cases, they do not have any idea about legal issues relating to child's custody and religious upbringing after their divorce. And Hindu Americans, they do not have any idea about biases against Hindu in the American court system, like what you described. So, with that, Raj, on our channel, most almost a year, Raj was on our channel almost a year ago and had an in-depth discussion about this case. It is a great interview for anyone in interfaith relationship to watch, and I have posted the link in that interview in the descriptions for today's interview below. When we interviewed Raj last year, He was in the midst of appealing this legal case. He had filed this appeal but had not had his hearing yet. Raj has since completed his appeal, and as he described, thankfully he won. We bring Raj back to discuss how this case went and lessons that other Hindu Americans can learn from his experiences. So let's hear from Raj. Again, welcome Raj to Interfaith Shadi.
Thank you, Dilipji. It's great to be back, especially with good news and not bad news.
Yes, I'm extremely happy for your win and look forward to hearing more about it. So before we get into it, are you okay discussing your personal life, situations, and legal issues? Because this is all very sensitive matter in your personal life.
Yes, and I normally wouldn't talk about it, so let me just give a few caveats I gave in our last interview. First, I am a private individual, so again, I normally wouldn't be talking about this kind of personal dispute. But this particular dispute led to pretty clearly what I would call this systemic bias in the judiciary, which is something everyone should want to address. So that's my motivation for coming out and talking about this situation. The other caveat is, while I do think the appellate court's decision validates what I said in our last interview and what I have to say today, it remains the case that I can only speak from my own perspective. So in fairness, to all the parties involved, I just want viewers to, understand that and take it as my perspective. And the final caveat is, I just want to be sensitive because of what's going on in the world. But, my case involved a dispute between a Jewish person and myself, a Hindu person, but it just as easily could have been members of other religions. So just want to be sensitive here. This is not about one religion versus another. I have so many great Jewish friends as well as Christian friends and Muslim friends. I've always been pluralistic and found wisdom in all religions. Um, so I just want to repeat that. This is really just about systemic bias towards any less well understood religion. So just out of respect for everyone, I just wanted to make those caveats again.
No, I think that's a very good point. So I know we discussed your situation in this detail last time, but can you do a quick recap for viewers who are learning this about the case for the first time? Perhaps first describe the situations that led to your original court case.
Yeah, sure, sure. So in brief, I was in an interfaith marriage. Neither of us converted to the other person's religion. Instead, we agreed to celebrate both our religions and raise any future children in both religions. We ended up having two boys together. We gave them both Hindu and Jewish names. Our eldest son is named Isaac Sham Yarasi, my last name. His first name Isaac is biblical, and his second name Sham is Hindu. Sham being another name for Krishna, of course. When our younger son was born, uh, we gave him the first name of Arav, another name for Lord Shiva, and the
Mhm.
middle name of Levi, which is Jewish. So we did Ulta. So, and switching that order of Hindu and Jewish names between the kids was intentional. It was meant to signify the equality of both religions in their lives. Anyhow, for unrelated reasons, the marriage ended when the kids were just 4 and 2. They were too young for any formal religious upbringing at that time. We ended up agreeing on joint custody with 50-50 parenting time. Our agreements did not specify any religious upbringing, but they gave me the Hindu holidays with the kids, and they gave my ex the Jewish holidays with the kids. One of our agreements also said that we would each separately pay for our own religious activities on our own time. So I thought everything was pretty clear, but unfortunately, we started having some disagreements over religious upbringing soon after. I won't get into everything that happened, but at some point, my ex, who was already taking the kids to a Jewish Sunday school program on her weekends, while I took them to a Hindu program on my weekends, she decided to schedule an additional day of Jewish religious schooling for the kids uh, every week, but on my weekday, and it was from after school into the evening. And I had a number of objections to this, three objections really. But basically, first, it was going to take away a lot of my quality time with my children, which to me is the most valuable time I have. Um, Even more so, given that I only have them half the time. Uh, in terms of waking hours, it was going to be the equivalent of practically a whole week of time with my kids every year. And this was going to go on for 7 years, this program that she was putting them in. But I wasn't being given makeup time for all that time. The other party was only willing to give me like a third.
Hmm.
Second reason I didn't like this was that it was going to interfere with the main way our children and I practice Hinduism, which is meditation, specifically a form of meditation called transcendental meditation, or TM, which you may have heard of. It's a very specific meditation technique. It's supposed to be done twice a day, every day, once in the morning and then once in the afternoon or the evening. And it's something that I've been doing for practically my entire adult life, over 25 years. It's the most important way I practice my religion. I've been doing it every day, generally twice a day, all these 25 years. And I've always wanted my children to experience the same benefits, to learn how to do it and make it a daily habit. So when this dispute came up, my children had already learned and started practicing this meditation technique, but not getting them until the evening on one of my, call it 3.5 days on average, when they then had to eat dinner, catch up on homework, and potentially other activities after, 2.5 hours spent on Hebrew school. That wasn't going to leave time for our meditation practice those evenings. I didn't have them in the afternoon, so I couldn't do it then. And then I was getting them, in the evening. So there was a legitimate timing conflict there. Uh, and my third objection, which is related, is that it meant unequal treatment of our religions because the boys were practicing meditation on my days, but not on their mother's days.
Hmm.
In my view, based on everything I had been hearing, this was because my meditation practice was just not allowed uh, on her time. Uh, Again, I want to be fair to the party. They disputed that characterization in our hearing and said they weren't stopping the kids from meditating. But as captured in the transcript of the hearing, they did acknowledge they didn't always, have time for the kids to meditate, given homework, dinner, etc. Um, Plus, I would say kids, any parent knows, young kids especially, they need to be told to do things. They never, the other party never said that they were doing that. So even going by their comments, it should have been clear, I think, to the judge that my kid's mother wasn't making sure my religious practice occurred on her time. Yet, contrary to that, she expected me to ensure her religious practice occurred on my time. And that's clearly not equal treatment of religion. And of course, in my version of events, the difference in treatment was worse. My religious activity was just not being allowed uh, on the other party's time. Um, Anyhow, I had already accepted that. I had accepted the kids wouldn't be able to meditate on their mother's time, and I had accepted that they would be raised Hindu on my time only and Jewish on her time. And that was fine. I had no problem with that. Uh, I certainly wasn't trying to get in the way of their Jewish upbringing. I simply asked that, my ex conduct any additional religious schooling on her time only. And that way it would solve all these problems. There would be no need for makeup time. There would be no timing conflict with our meditation practice on my time, and there would be equal treatment of religions. Uh, I even did some research and gave some suggestions in that regard. I found another Hebrew school in the same town with classes on her days only. I suggested using a private tutor. I asked around and spoke to a number of my Jewish friends, and one of my best friends, a Jewish buddy of mine, he did that for his kids and thought it was actually a better alternative. Uh, all my Jewish friends agreed with me that these were all good alternatives, and my ex should do her own religious activities on her time. Uh, Unfortunately, we're unable to resolve this on our own, and I wasn't even getting, a fair amount of makeup time. So I felt I had no choice but to take this to court, out of principle and wanting equal time, being an equal parent. So that's what led to the original court case. And I know in our prior interview we went into all my personal situation, but just to make it brief, that's a quick recap as you asked.
No, that's a great recap. Now, uh, can you give recap of what happened in that court? In particular, what you asked for and how the judge ruled and why, and what led you to file an appeal?
Sure. Yeah, so in my motion, you know, as I was indicating, I basically asked that my ex continue doing her religious activities on her own time, her own days. But my lawyer did advise me that the courts have a lot of latitude to rule however they want based on the quote unquote best interests of the child. And he warned me, he asked around, and evidently this is common knowledge in the legal community. He warned me that judges tend to favor the religious institutions they're familiar with. So, as a member of a less well understood religion, I might not get a fair shake.
Mm.
So I recognize that. And in my motion, I also expressly asked, in addition to asking that she do it on her own time, I expressly asked that if you, Your Honor, disagree with me and decide to allow the children to attend Hebrew school on my time, despite all the reasons I'm giving, at least give me hour for hour makeup time, which would be only fair given that we had a signed agreement, 50-50 parenting time, etc. In my court filings, I made all the points I've mentioned, the time lost with my kids, the timing conflict with our meditation practice, the unequal treatment that would be caused. I also wrote in detail about the long history of meditation in Hinduism. I wanted the judge to understand its religious significance, um, knowing that, she seemed to have a Judeo-Christian name, so just knowing that she may not be familiar. And I explained how it was the most important way that I practiced my religion, how Hinduism could be practiced a number of different ways, and this was one of the common ways. I detailed how our particular meditation technique works and how exactly, this other activity would conflict with it. And I even offered all the alternatives I just mentioned, the alternatives that my Jewish friends had suggested, and I cited my Jewish friends in my brief.
Mhm.
Uh, so these are all the papers you submit, then you have to wait, then you have the hearing months later. So we then went before the judge for a hearing. Each of us was represented by counsel. And the judge heard each side, but didn't ask any questions, and then quickly ruled against me, saying that she felt it was in the children's best interest to attend the Hebrew school that their mother wanted them to. Um, and the judge gave some reasons, some of which I have to say, in fairness, made some sense in isolation.
Mhm.
The judge spoke at length about the Jewish religious activity. She spoke about the importance of Hebrew school for their Jewish upbringing. She even mentioned that it was required by their synagogue. But my issue is that not once did the judge ever mention the Hindu religious activity or its importance for the children's Hindu upbringing or its significance in my religion, like not even once. And there was no questioning, nothing about why my religious activity wasn't being supported the same way on their mother's time. There was no attempt to ensure equal treatment of religion.
Mhm.
Uh, for example, she could have said that the kids could go to Hebrew school on my time, but only if they could meditate on the other party's time. And then that would have given the other party a choice to make. And I think that would have been far more
Mhm.
fair. Um, Now, the one good thing is the judge did grant me the hour for hour makeup time I asked for.
Mhm.
Again, this is only logical. We had an agreement with 50-50 custody. You can't undo that agreement, right? Uh, for uh, for a reason like this. So why wouldn't you get equal makeup time? But still, I was happy about that because I wasn't getting it otherwise. And it was a lot more makeup time than I was being given otherwise. And, uh, my kids are everything to me, and that alone made my motion worth the time and money. So I was happy about that as a consolation prize. Now, if the case had just ended there, I wouldn't even be here talking to you about this. I would have
Mhm.
still thought the decision was unfair, not treating religions equally, but I wouldn't have appealed. I would have just taken my makeup time and moved on. But what was really, really terrible was what the judge then did. She declared me to be in bad faith for filing my motion and penalized me financially by ordering me to pay the other party's counsel fees. Uh, I was really shocked by this and also just totally confused. I had been nothing but honest and respectful in everything I wrote. And there wasn't any real explanation for why my motion was in bad faith. The judge's only comments on that were that she somehow thought I was just trying to get in the way of my ex-wife's religious activity, but she didn't offer any explanation as to why she thought that. And it didn't
Mhm.
make any logical sense to me. I had just asked my ex to do her religious activities on her own time. I even researched and found alternatives in that regard. Uh, I very clearly explained all my points in my court papers. I was defending a legitimate religious practice, and that should never be considered bad faith in this country if you
Mhm.
believe in freedom of religion, which is the very First Amendment of the Constitution. So, and logically, how can my motion be in bad faith when the judge herself actually gave me fair makeup time, significant makeup time? My lawyers also thought this was ridiculous, and that it made no sense.
Mhm.
And one of the best law firms in New Jersey.
Mhm.
So I took real issue with that, and I felt it sent a dangerous message to Hindu Americans in general that if you defend your religious rights in court, not only are you likely to lose, but you will be punished. And this I felt was something that, out of principle, shouldn't be left to stand.
Yeah.
So after a lot of soul searching, talking to friends, etc. You know, some felt that, hey, it's probably not worth it, just move on. Some were like, yeah, this is outrageous, you should do something. I ended up deciding to file an appeal. My lawyers warned me that it's very, very difficult to win appeals here in New
Hmm.
Jersey because they give a lot of discretion to the lower court judges, and appellate judges are they generally don't want to overturn lower court judges' decisions.
Yeah.
And my lawyers felt that if I appealed the entire decision, I would most likely lose.
Hmm.
But they also felt that the bad faith part was completely illogical, and if I appealed that, then, you know, uh, my chances were better.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. You know, I didn't want the baby to get thrown out with the bathwater if I appealed the whole thing. I got some advice from my lawyers on on the points to make, and they were terrific. Uh, but because I'd already spent a lot of time and money on this, I decided to represent myself to save money, really. Um, I should mention I did get help from HAF, the Hindu American Foundation. I reached out to them without any intro and just emailed someone there, and Samir Kalra, whom you know, and he got right back to me actually and offered to meet via Zoom. And so they were great, very responsive. They then read the court papers themselves and agreed with me that this ruling was not only outrageous, but that was unconstitutional and sent a dangerous message for religious minorities like ours. And they
Hmm.
felt strongly enough to file an amicus curiae in my case,
Oh, good.
which was really helpful. And so I'm grateful for that. Just to add to, what I was saying.
Yeah. No, thanks for that recap and thank you for fighting for Hindu community. And again, if anyone wants to more detail, there is a link to our prior interview in the descriptions of the video below. Now, can you bring up to the date on how the appeal went?
Yeah, sure. So I filed my papers, and then I think I had to wait like several months for the hearing date. Everything was backed up. It takes time, and it was uh, during that waiting period that we did our prior interview. So at that time, as you know, I didn't have any idea how the hearing would go.
Mhm.
Again, I represented myself, and I requested oral arguments. I wanted to make my case before the judges. At that hearing, there was a panel of judges there, initially three, and then two for my particular case. Two very senior, well-respected judges. Appellate judges in general are more senior. They're
Mhm.
considered best of the best. And I could actually tell that these particular judges were really, really good. I got to the courtroom early, and I got to listen to a few other cases before mine actually came up. And these judges were amazing. They clearly read all the briefs in advance. They had amazing memories, and they asked super intelligent questions. So I was really impressed. It kind of restored my faith in the judiciary, to be honest.
Good.
Anyhow, then my case came up. Um, it was me versus the other party's lawyer. I made my argument, she made hers. I made my counter arguments. The judges had a lot of questions, unlike the lower court hearing, which was great. And I thought it went very well.
Mhm.
Uh, but you never really know. They don't tell you right there, and then it takes a few months to get the judgment. Fortunately, as I hoped, they overturned the lower court's judgment, and they basically saw the case exactly the way I did. So don't
Mhm.
need to rehash it. But they pointed out the makeup time I got. They said it's difficult to reconcile a finding of bad faith with all the makeup time I got by filing my motion. They also validated that I had every right to defend, my right to raise my kids Hindu. They
Mhm.
wrote that I had raised a reasonable argument that my ex-wife scheduling her religious activity on my time with the children would interfere with his ability to train his son in the Hindu practice of meditation.
Mhm.
Finally, they wrote that the lower court mistakenly exercised its discretion with the
Mhm.
bad faith finding, which was erroneous and not supported by the record. And they
Mhm.
overturned not just the bad faith finding, but also the financial penalty. So I got my money back.
Good.
I would just note that the other party did fight this pretty hard. They even filed a motion for reconsideration after the judgment, but the appeals court denied that. So,
Mhm. Good.
which means they basically reaffirmed their decision. So it was a pretty definitive decision, which is good.
Wow, that's great. Congratulations. What about the prioritization of your wife's religious activities over yours? Overall, this is an interfaith marriage. Did they comment on that?
No, but again, I didn't appeal that, even though I disagreed with it for the practical reason that it was going to be difficult to win. It seemed difficult to win, given how the statutes are written, given the advice I was getting. And I wrote that in my appeal that I was not appealing it, even though I disagreed with it, for these practical reasons.
Mhm.
So that was never an issue in the appeal, and the judges did not comment on it. I think the judges like to just stick to the issues under appeal and not diverge and stray into something that could be viewed as, extraneous,
Mhm.
which makes sense. But I will say part of me now wonders whether I should have appealed the whole case. The appellate judges turned out to be excellent. Plus, they recognized that I was defending a Hindu religious activity, which the lower court judge had completely ignored. And I just don't see how you can decide between two competing activities and consider the importance of one while completely ignoring the other. It doesn't
Mhm.
make any logical sense. So maybe I would have won and maybe I should have appealed, but they say, as they say, hindsight's always 2020, and I also can't say for sure how the case would have gone had I appealed the entire decision. And you only have 30 days to file an appeal, and then it's too late. So I can't go back now and appeal that part of the decision. Uh, but I would say that I'm glad I won what I did, and I think that the appellate court's decision does call into question that part of the lower court's decision as well. This prioritization of one religious activity over another, given everything they wrote. So there's a certain moral victory there.
Mhm.
And, what I'm really trying to do now is see how I can leverage this to help others in our community and get some reform passed so that
Mhm.
others don't have to go through what I did.
Very true.
And most people don't appeal. It's just more money, more time, very unlikely to win. And I've heard multiple anecdotes by now about others going through similar situations or worse, where the courts actually decided the kids were of a different religion and favored that religion. So that's where I'm really focusing my efforts now.
Now I think it's only Raj. You have that kind of energy. Most other Hindus don't have the money, time, or this kind of energy to fight with the system. I mean, to fight with the system. So, can you explain what kind of reform that you are looking for, which other Hindu community can help your initiative? Because one day they will also need it. So, can you explain what kind of reform you are looking for?
Sure, sure. And, this is underway, but I've thought about it and I've spoken to some people, including, someone at one of the state senators' offices. And I suspect the main reason for what happened to me, uh, again, the judge didn't explain herself too well in the lower court decision, but I suspect the main reason is just ignorance about our religion
Hmm.
in multiple respects. Our religious activities, which are often not institutional in nature, like meditation or other yogic spiritual practices. Um, the diverse ways in which our religion can be practiced, whether at a temple or at home, the
Hmm.
inherent pluralism of Hinduism, meaning there's nothing preventing us from participating in other religions' activities, and that doesn't make one any less Hindu.
Hmm.
Uh, and then finally, I would say ignorance about our situation here in the U.S. I mean, we're a relatively new religious minority. We just don't have the kind of infrastructure other religions have, uh, with the exception of just some areas where there's a super high concentration of Indians, like Edison, New Jersey. But I don't live there. In my town that I was living in, and the adjoining towns, there was not a single Hindu temple. So I think the judiciary is ignorant about all these things. And, we talked about this in a prior interview, so I won't rehash all that. But I think a simple rule, like a judicial reform, that no judge should make a ruling impacting the religious upbringing of a child, for example, by favoring one religion's activity over another, which is what happened in my case, unless they have sufficient knowledge about both the religions at stake. That would go a long way to protecting our interests and the interests of people of all minority religions, frankly. Uh, and I think that kind of reform is something that everyone should be able to get on board with, given that it's not specific to Hindus, it's just a general principle. So I've reached out to a few legislators here in New Jersey. We have the highest concentration of Hindu Americans of any state. I would think legislators would care about that. And if we can get it passed here, then maybe this picks up steam and can get passed in other states like California. I have
Hmm.
a friend who's a judge in California, and she confirmed they have no rule about religious upbringing there and no education. And California has a lot of Hindu Americans as well. So I would think this is something that should get passed there as well. there's one assemblyman's office who's willing to take this forward, but we need help in drafting what this legislation would look like. So I'm reaching out to other legislators with legal backgrounds and trying to reach out to judges. But let's see, we're not their biggest priority. So I'm frankly, even though we have the highest concentration, we're still a small minority here. Um, Unfortunately, it's only recently that we're becoming more politically active. So I'm also networking, talking to people like you to raise visibility to see if we can create some sort of community pressure together. Um, because I'd really like to, uh, you know, uh, leverage my case and do something positive with it. There's an old saying that I love. I tell my kids this all the time: when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So that's what I'm trying to do now.
No, great. Thank you. So that kind of reform could make sense. Secular judge should not be favoring one faith at the expense of other faith. Now, I just want to ask you about one thing, which is a particular interest to me and to my audience of Hindu Americans entering in interfaith relationships. In your case, it seems that your ex wife made a case that the children were actually Jewish, not Hindu, in justifying why Hebrew school was important to them. Can you discuss the arguments that were made for our audience who might about to enter in an interfaith relationship?
Sure. Yes, that did seem to be the crux of the other party's case, that the children were basically Jewish or Jewish only, and therefore
Hmm.
should do Jewish activities even on my time, even at the expense of Hindu activities. Um, and in fairness, the other side, I want to be fair. This is my perspective, but in fairness, the other side might dispute that characterization, but they did state it was actually they did make statements that it was actually wrong that I enrolled the children in Hindu activities, and made other statements which I just don't think could be taken any other way than to mean that the kids were Jewish only.
Mhm.
Um, they later changed, but if you look at the sequence of statements, their initial brief, it was just that the children are Jewish. Their lawyer, uh, her lawyer, even quoted Jewish law during our court hearing, and this is in the transcript, that if the mother is Jewish, the children are Jewish, which I thought was an interesting argument to make in a secular court. And we were for an interfaith couple. Um, and I thought it was ironic given that we had named both kids after Hindu gods, which I'm pretty sure would not be in keeping with Jewish law to begin with. Uh, but anyhow, I described all this at length in our prior interviews. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but to your point, they did emphasize all the Jewish activities we did together while we were married. They spoke at length about the fact that I had agreed to the children having a bris. They even included pictures of me wearing a yarmulke at some Jewish occasion and suggested that I had become more Jewish than Hindu during the marriage. Of course, I was just being pluralistic, by the way, and showing respect for, my partner's religious rituals. Uh, Respecting your spouse's faith should not mean I'm any less Hindu. Uh, so yeah, that was the crux of their case.
No, I think it's very interesting, and that's most Hindus does is that in interfaith relationship that they to respect the other spouse faith, they go all out to embrace it. But one thing I always say, no BBS. That is no bris, no baptism, and no shahadat. And in your case, the bris for your children was a big focus of theirs. Look, they had the bris, meaning they are Jews. And they brought up the fact that you signed the Ketubah agreement or Jewish, that is a Jewish marriage contract. Something else I recommend Hindu don't do it. Not to sign the, don't go for bris, don't go for Ketubah or no BBS whatsoever. How impactful do you think those things were in the lower court judgment decisions?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to say I did agree to a lot of Jewish rituals, but always on the understanding that they were being done in a completely interfaith manner.
Mhm.
So, the ketubah that they presented, if you zoomed in on the text, they had it in an exhibit, but if you actually zoomed in on the text, it had Hebrew and it had English, and it was very clearly an interfaith ketubah with the language all about, respecting each other's differences, cherishing those differences. There was absolutely nothing in there about being Jewish, raising a Jewish family, anything like that.
Mm,
So to me, it was just, a nice piece of artwork and something, that she wanted. And, we did Hindu things for our wedding too. Um, I did agree to a bris, but that didn't mean my children were any less Hindu.
yeah.
If you're interfaith or pluralist, children should be raised in two faiths. And in fact, to counter that, I dug up old instant messages that I still had in my Gmail between us, showing that we specifically looked for someone to do the bris who would do it for interfaith families.
Mm,
And, you know, uh, I presented those as evidence, by the way. I also found and presented lots of old emails in which the other party, my ex herself, in her own words, referred to us as a Hindu Jewish family or as interfaith. And probably most compelling as a rebuttal, I presented an email in which she had written to me in her own words that we had always agreed that I would have the right to raise our children Hindu in addition to Jewish. So I thought I did a pretty good job defending myself against all the points they raised. Uh, and, as I said during my appeals hearing, I could have easily have played up the Hindu activities, like her accepting a Mangal Sutra during our wedding ceremony and becoming part of a Hindu family, or the fact that Hinduism is, patrilineal. And I could have made some argument that the children, were basically Hindu or Hindu only. But I think that would have been ridiculous.
mm,
And all the evidence was that her intent was to raise the kids in both religions and the kids being equally both Hindu as well as Jewish. The appellate judges kind of nodded in agreement when I was saying this.
mm,
Uh, so I think they thought the other party's arguments were, you know, not legitimate. Anyhow, I think by the end of it, going back to the original case and whether that impacted the judge, um, I think by the end of it, all these emails and texts I presented at least made an impact on the other party or perhaps jogged their memory because they then did a reversal. They basically flip-flopped with the lawyer later writing to the judge that her client had never denied the children's Hinduism and always told them that they were both Jewish and Hindu.
mm,
And this was quite a departure from their initial statements, which again, I think made the case that the children are basically Jewish or Jewish only. But clearly, to your question, the judge missed this flip flop because she still declared me to be the one acting in bad faith, and
mm,
I'm guessing the judge must have been impacted by their initial arguments that the children were Jewish because of the Bris and Ketubah and so forth, and then maybe didn't pay attention to my evidence and how it got the other party to admit the children were also Hindu. Because I just don't know how else the judge could have prioritized the Jewish activity while completely ignoring the Hindu one,
mm,
and then found me in bad faith. Uh, you know, even though by law I'm supposed to be able to raise the kids in whatever religion I want in my time, judges are given a lot of latitude and they can make exceptions based on what they deem to be in the quote unquote best interests of the child. So if for whatever reason this judge got the impression that kids were Jewish to begin with, then she may have been more likely to make such an exception and therefore favor the kid's Jewish identity.
mm,
I think that's what happened here. And, judges are human beings. I think they're colored by their own backgrounds, as we all are. And, the judges are practically all Judeo-Christian
mm,
in background. I went through all the judges' names. They're on the New Jersey court website. And only 1% of the New Jersey judges have Hindu origin names. We're probably 5% of the population, but only 1% of the judges. The other 99% are almost all Judeo-Christian names. And
mm,
naturally, those judges would be most familiar with Judeo-Christian activities, but maybe not other religions' activities.
mm,
And this seems to be common knowledge. I mean, my lawyer checked around and asked, people in the legal fraternity, and that was a message he got. So to your question, I think all those things they mentioned, the Bris, the Ketubah, even though in actuality, in my perspective, they were all interfaith, I think they did make an impact given what happened, given how the other side portrayed them and given the judge's own Judeo-Christian background. Because I think you and I would totally agree that a Hindu American judge would never have ruled this way,
right, true.
and
Mm,
I think all Hindu Americans need to be aware of these risks.
mm. Very interesting. All interfaith couples should see the video, understand all those. So all along, I recommend Hindus not to agree for the BBS, the Bris, baptism, and Sahadat Sunan. Basically, those are exclusive labels, I call it. Keep it out to avoid any such problems like Raj is facing here. If you follow that, Raj, you would have saved a lot of aggravations in your life, what you are going through today. Anyhow, along this line, let me ask something. Uh, that your ex-wife's in your ex-wife's brief, she wrote you're putting your kids into Hindu school. So Hindu putting children's own children in Hindu school, and in your own word, was quote unquote offensive. In your appeal, you wrote the following word. Let me read it. That defendant also used disparaging language towards Hindu. Why should Hindu school be offensive when defendant's counsel assert that the defendant has always said, and the children are both Jewish and Hindu? Why should Hindu school be offensive when defendant herself seems fit to enroll the children in Jewish schools? Further, you wrote that defendants labels plaintiff, meaning you, religious activity as offensive and claim plaintiff was a bad Hindu. Wow, she said you are a bad Hindu. Imagine if someone were to write that defendants taking her children to synagogue for a Jewish school was offensive, then the claim she was a bad Jew. Such comment would be considered highly insulting at best and anti-Semitic at worst. Applied to a Hindu, defendant's comment sounds as offensive. So that's what you wrote it. Now that your case has been validated by the appellate court, which appellants called writing that there was no reason for you to be found in bad faith. Does this language now seems more biased? That statement, was it a Hindu phobic since putting your children to Hindu school was considered offensive?
Uh, yeah. Well, again, I'm only talking publicly about my case because of the civil rights concerns that resulted from it. I mean, my case is public, so anyone can email the New Jersey court system, and as you did, and get all the documents and read them. But still, I'd like to stay away from anything too personal in nature, just out of respect for everyone involved. So I'd rather not comment on the precise language used there. I've just tried to convey both parties' positions as fairly as I can, and just the ones that pertain to, the civil rights concerns. But I think, what you read, it does show that, there was this argument made that the kids were, initially, kids were Jewish only. So I'll leave it at that.
Yep. But my point is that the judge actually rewarded these comments in your wife briefs that putting your children to Hindu school was offensive, and ultimately by making you pay ex-wife's legal fees, not only they punish you but rewarded her. And now the appellate court, with a panel of two very senior judges, studied your case, heard the argument on both sides, and ruled that there were simply no ground for you to be found in bad faith. So the lower court judge, the first judge, basically rewarded comments that I think any Hindu would find offensive, insulting. Now, just let me play the scenario. Had you been the Christian, enroll your children into the Christian Sunday school, and then you went before this same judge, would the other party have dared to give priority to Bar Mitzvah over baptism and call the Christian party offensive? I doubt it. Given you won the case, is it not the judge rewarded these actions set a wrong precedence?
Yeah, I mean, that was the crux of
Hmm?
my appeal in multiple respects. So, I stand by what I wrote there. But look, I do want to say I don't know the judge. I actually have friends who are judges, and they're generally, they're my friends at least are good people. They're trying to do the right thing, and I do like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Uh, so since you brought it up, I did mean what I wrote, that the judge's decision set a bad precedent in multiple ways. But I do want to say I tried my best in my appeal to make it about the judge's decision, not her intent. In fact, I wrote in the very first page of my brief that I would like to think that her decision was unintentional. So I acknowledge it's possible the judge didn't intend to reward those comments. It's possible she just missed them. She seemed to miss a lot of things. But nonetheless, yeah, I would agree. I think her decision set a terrible precedent against Hindus and Hindu practices in a number of ways, and that should not be allowed, and that's why I appealed.
Nope, fair enough. Okay, let's move on. What lessons would you say a couple in Hindu-Jewish relationship or any interfaith relationship should take away from your experience?
Really, to follow your advice, Dilipji, I'll be honest, if I had met you before I got married and heard you talking about no BBS, recommending no BBS, I would have thought that extreme. I would have thought, there's no harm in celebrating other people's religious traditions. And if you're really interfaith, isn't that what interfaith means? Respecting others the way they are. But then, now based on my personal experience, my situation turned into exactly what you have warned about. That's why I say it's a case study for how agreeing to some of these rituals can later work against you, you know? And again, I want to be sensitive to all my friends of different faiths. Many of them are in happy interfaith marriages. Um, so this is not about one religion versus another. But there's no doubt that historically, at least, some of these other religions were exclusivist in nature, with certain rituals conveying that exclusivist mindset. And there's no doubt, just look at the names and the numbers, that almost all the judges come from those religions. And many of them are older, and they may still be conditioned to believe that these rituals are exclusivist. I mean, the other side presented pictures of me wearing a yarmulke, making me out to be more Jewish than Hindu. Which I only did out of respect at certain Jewish occasions. And I was raised that way. And in my mind, it didn't make me any less Hindu. And I think any Hindu would agree. We know that because our religion has always been pluralistic, as Swami Vivekananda emphasized. And I grew up in his tradition, going to a Vivekananda Ramakrishna mission Sunday school when I was a kid in Los Angeles. So that's always been my mindset. But the judges here may have been raised to believe differently. Back in the 60s or 70s, it was not too long ago. It was unthinkable for, say, a Catholic to wear a yarmulke or a Jew to participate in communion. So whether they say it or not, I think these judges could look at a picture of, a Hindu wearing a yarmulke and think, how Hindu could this guy really be? And that could bias their decision, given how much latitude they're given. So, I think your advice in retrospect is good advice. I still, I still have hope that people entering into interfaith relationships can celebrate each other's rituals. I think many of them are also fun and just an excuse for a party, and would make the other person feel welcome and their family. But I would say at a minimum, have a very clear agreement in writing that you're raising the children interfaith, meaning in two faiths, and 50-50, no matter what rituals you engage in. Maybe that's a way to kind of thread the needle there. But look, I don't know, Dilipji. I didn't have a formal agreement like that, but I did have a ton of evidence, including all the emails I presented, including one where the other party literally wrote that we had always agreed I would have the right to raise the children Hindu. You could look at their names. I mean, and I still got ruled against, and in fact declared to be in bad faith. And I had to run pillar to post to get that overturned. So there's no doubt in my mind that the system is biased, and because the system is biased, maybe it's probably out of ignorance, maybe not intentional, but still it's clearly biased against Hindu Americans. And because of that bias, I think there's a good argument for being extra careful and following your advice.
Very true. Yeah. Thank you, Raj, for sharing your experiences here. And congratulations again for winning the appeal, which is a victory not just for you only, but also for all Hindu Americans in general.
Thank you, Dilipji, and thank you for having me again.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.